My best friend Mara wanted to get my mind off of things and told me that a friend of hers was arranging a hunting trip in the deep Montana woods. I've grown up in these woods my whole life. Before my dad died, we used to come up here all the time and hunt elk when they were in season. The idea of doing it now, after everything that I went through watching his cancer spread and take his life, it was hard to swallow. But Mara and her friends didn't know that, and I could tell by her excitement she wanted this to be an amazing experience for us to get back to normal. So I didn't say no. There were 6 of us in total: Colin, David, Mara, her sister Regina, and the one that arranged the whole trip, a girl that none of us knew too well named Flora. I sat in the back next to Regina and asked about her own struggles. I knew that she had been forced to move out quickly to make college and was a long way from home, so we bonded on the way to the woods, talking about the changes that life had thrown at us and how we were adapting. I don't know where I would be if it wasn't for Mara. She's been more than just a sister. She's been my best friend, she told me. Mara seemed to be able to tackle any obstacle without even batting an eye. It was admirable, but I had no idea she was hiding a lot of deeper issues until we reached the hunting range. Colin dispensed the guns and reminded us of the rules. We would stay together and hunt together for a few hours and then regroup near an Airbnb that Flora had rented for us. Everyone seemed to be in agreement, but I wasn't sure Mara was listening. She was busy trying to figure out how to load her gun. "Need help with that?" I asked as I took it from her and remarked, "How long has it been since you've done this?" She sheepishly admitted it had been several years and she had gotten rusty. Her friend Flora wasn't any better, and it made me a little hesitant to even head into the woods with them. "I'll be right by your side," David told the new girl. I could tell he was trying his best to flirt, and it wasn't working. I decided to focus on the woods and how quiet everything was. "There should be plenty of wildlife deeper in," Regina told me. We walked together down a game trail, focusing on the crushed grass and the falling leaves. David and Colin were behind us, and Flora and Mara took the rear. All of us were doing our best to be as quiet as possible for the next half an hour as we followed trails deeper into the woods. At last, we reached an overlook. Colin heard noises and gestured for all of us to tread carefully, and I knelt down to try and get a good look at our surroundings. "Look there! A big old bull!" David said as loud as he could without spooking the male elk. It was grazing about 60 yards in front of us between 2 larger trees, a difficult shot to make. Yet for some reason, Flora was aiming her weapon, getting ready to fire. I stood up to try and stop her, grabbing the barrel, but it went off anyway. About a dozen different things happened all at once. I managed to not cuss her out as I jumped away from the barrel before it took my hand off. But David was not so lucky. He let out a sudden gasp, and all of us turned to see that the bullet had ripped straight through his chest. "Jesus Christ! Get him back to the car!" Regina shouted. David dropped to the ground in pain as blood spurted out of the wound, and he tried his best to cover it. "The closest hospital's like an hour from here. Do you think we'll make it?" Colin shouted. I checked my cell phone, trying to see if I had reception. Flora was staring at what she had done, trying to not hyperventilate. "I can't go to jail. I have a future. This was an accident," she blubbered. "Shut up! No one is dying out here," I told her as I tried to think. David was holding his hat next to the wound to soak up blood, but it didn't look great for him. Mara, seemingly acting on her own without consulting anyone, took the gun from Flora and pointed it at David. Before any of us could say a word, she fired again. This time, our friend dropped dead. "Are you insane? You just murdered him!" Colin shouted. "It was an accident. We already confirmed that we couldn't make it back to the hospital. Watching him bleed out was wrong. No one should die that way," she said in a cold and logical voice. "So your solution was to make that choice for him? Who made you a judge and executioner?" I asked in surprise. "It was the only way. Now we can all agree that this was an accident and report it that way, or else we all wind up in jail for being accomplices to a murder," she said coldly. "That's insane!" Regina shouted. The rest of us were too stunned to argue. Colin reluctantly agreed after a long, intense silence. We burn his body and then dispose of the weapon. No one ever needs to find him, Mara ordered. All of us were so frightened by her attitude that we didn't dare argue and did what we were told. An hour later, rain was hitting us hard and we couldn't find our way back toward our car. Colin and Flora were arguing while Regina and I were just trying to keep up. Her sister kept to herself, quiet and angry as we left behind David's body. All of us felt uneasy being near Mara. We didn't know if she would snap at us next, and then we got to the car at last. We encountered a new problem.
Damn it! David has the keys!
Colin realized in anger.
You just thought of that?
Mara snapped back.
I'm sorry, I was a bit busy worrying about the fact that you just killed someone,
he growled. Instantly, Mara took a gun and pointed it toward Colin.
I'm tired of you calling me a murderer. It was an accident. All I did was spare him more misery, she told him.
I was right behind her, but frozen in fear as Colin took a step back.
All I'm saying is none of this would have happened had we just tried to get him to the hospital, he argued.
In response, she shot down near the ground at his foot.
We could have another accident on our hands real soon if you keep talking like that, Mara warned. Have you lost your mind? Are you just going to kill us all if we don't cooperate?
Flora shouted.
I might, if it comes to that. I don't see why we're dragging this out. David's gone now. Can't change the past. Why do we need to mess up everyone else's lives because of a simple mistake? She asked.
The only one being a mess up here is you, Regina told her sister. The two squared off, and I thought for a moment Mara might even shoot her sister. Are you gonna kill me too, sis? What's gotten into you? Regina acted quick when she saw a moment of hesitation and grabbed her sister. The two fell on the gravel and wrestled. The gun slipped from Mara's grasp. Colin grabbed it and then dispersed the bullets by firing them randomly into the air. Now you're going to cooperate with us, he said. Mara reluctantly was placed in the car's back seat while Flora and Colin went to find David's body. I thought that once we got the keys, that would be the end of it. We would report this madness and finally be in the clear. To my surprise, when Colin returned, he had other plans. He forced Mara out of the car and then drove off. As we got down the road, my jaw dropped when I realized that he was stranding her there. We're going to report her and David missing. The rest of us were never on this trip at all. Got it? We have to agree that this never happened. That way she takes the fall for everything, Colin told us. All of us agreed to this, despite how guilty it made us feel. We drove to the nearest ranger outpost in silence and reported it just as Colin wanted when we made it back to town. About 3 days later, they found David's body and concluded that it was a homicide, but they never found Mara. I hope that means she didn't get away, though, because if so, I'm positive she will find us and continue the hunt. Ever had a friend that was always tons of fun to be around in high school, but deep down inside you knew they would need to straighten up when they got out into the real world? For me, that friend was Blake. Blake was a country boy like me, raised on the wrong side of the tracks, but always had a smile on his face. He knew how to make people laugh, and always had a trick up his sleeve. He was a troublemaker for sure, and as I grew up, I began to realize that despite the fact that I found his company enjoyable, I didn't see us staying friends once I was grown and married and with kids. When we graduated, we promised to stay in touch, but never followed through. Years went past, even a 10-year reunion, and we never really hung out again. Then, out of the blue one day, I got a letter in the mail from Blake. I don't even know how he had my address. It changed a few times since then. It genuinely surprised me to hear from him after all this time. And what the letter said also made me think that he had finally changed his ways. Joey, I think it's time you and I went and had a trip together. We always talked about fishing and hunting on your grandparents' land when we were kids, but never followed through with that conversation. Listen, I want to be real with you. The doctors have given me a short time on this earth, and I want to make the most of it. Me and my old lady are going to gather our hunting gear and make that trip we always talked about. Do you want to join or what? The letter read. My wife didn't have any objections. It's the least you can do given his health situation, she told me. I honestly knew I would feel guilty for the rest of my life if I had said no. The letter came with a phone number, so I texted Blake and we made arrangements that next weekend. I was nervous, wondering if I had made the right choice, especially when we finally met near a truck stop on the outside of town. He had a Ford F-150, all filled with camping and hunting gear, and wore camouflage from head to toe. His wife seemed excited for the trip. In fact, despite the circumstances, Blake was grinning from ear to ear. He had shaved his head, probably from chemotherapy, and hopped out of the truck to give me a big hug. "You see that, Gracie? I knew Joy would show up," he said. His strength hid the sickness he was battling. He asked why my wife couldn't show, and I explained she had work to cover a double shift for her. "She simply asked that we bag a few deer and turn them into chili," I told him. I was glad that there didn't seem to be any bad feelings between us, despite how long it had been since we talked. It felt like time had never really gone forward, and we were still two goofy kids again. "I know that sounds good. Blake isn't much of a hunter, but we will get something done. I don't want this trip to be a complete waste of time," his wife said as we unloaded his truck. "Well, it's a good thing we are hunting deer," Blake commented as we started into the woods. I asked him what our prey was instead, but he simply winked and told me it would be a surprise. "Definitely glad you came for the trip, Joey," he told me as we started our hike. We went deep into the forest, Gracie and Blake hardly saying a word to each other for about an hour. It began to rain, making it difficult for us to be able to find any game trail, so we took a break beneath a canopy of trees. "Well, this puts a kink in the plans," Blake commented. "What exactly is the plan? We're pretty far out here, bud. Are you going to let me know what the surprise is?" I asked, trying to temper my frustration. "Sure, I guess this is fine," he said calmly. I was looking toward the next area, trying to see if the storm was going to pass when I heard a loud boom. I dropped and covered my ears, turning to see that Blake had just shot his wife in the head. Her entire face was blown off, and I knew the death was swift and painless, but the shock and horror of what he had just done made me want to scream. "I barely have a few weeks left, Joey. This is what I've been planning for quite a while, and I brought you to do something else," he said as he kicked his wife's corpse out of the way, and then he passed me his gun, which still had one shot left in it. "I don't want to go to weeks of chemo or waste my money on treatment that won't change a thing, and I don't want to suffer. This is my final wish," he told me. The implications of what he was saying and what he had just done. I looked at the gun and at the corpse, my mouth dry. I wanted to run. I could. I knew that since he was sick, he wouldn't be able to catch up with me. But for some reason, I thought maybe I could reason with him. "Blake, you just killed your wife. Why did you do that?" I asked. I was trying to not sound scared, trying to figure out why he had suddenly become a cold-blooded killer. It's true, she's the love of my life, but I can't imagine her going on without me, and that's why I had to end her life. "She ain't gonna enjoy her life without me," Blake said. He had a wild look in his eyes. But despite that, his anger and frustration over what he was experiencing made a certain amount of sense. I could empathize, but there was one thing that still bothered me. Why did you choose me? If I do this, I'll probably wind up in jail. Why are you punishing me with this? I asked. Blake actually laughed. "I know you think I'm a loser. You always have. It's true. I messed up a lot of times, but you were always such a goody-goody, and now it's time to make you pay. Because a lot of times when I got in trouble, you were right there with me and never got a single lick. The teachers, the parents, they always thought you were just another victim," he snarled. "And if I refuse, have you thought that through? I could go report this to the police right now," I told him. "You could, but I thought this through. I could kill you too, and then just die out here in the woods," he said with a shrug. "I'm the one with the gun," I told him. Then he took off his camouflage and showed that he had an explosive device around his waist. "You can shoot me anywhere besides the head and it will cause the thing to go off. Or I could tackle you and end us both in a blaze of glory," Blake snapped back. I was sweating despite the cold temperature, and I wanted to run like I first thought. But I knew if I did that, he might try to set off the explosive and kill me anyway. I was trapped here in the middle of nowhere with a madman. Blake, I don't want to do this, I said, my anxiety increasing as I looked at the gun and pointed it at him. You know you've always hated me, Joey. This is your darkest fantasy come true. This is where everything finally can come to a head, he shouted. I was ready to fire. Then I heard a noise from the left. 2 hunters came out of the woods, looking at us in confusion and surprise. Blake thought that he could act quickly to scare them away with a bomb vest, but I had other plans. I pointed the gun toward the first hunter and shot him in the foot. He fell to the ground, and in response, the second hunter fired at me in self-defense, and I jumped out of the way. It hit Blake dead in the shoulder. He fell to the ground, ready to use the bomb to kill all of us. I shouted for the hunters to run, and in that short moment of time, I had the chance to jump away toward the hunter I had injured. His explosive caused body parts to fly in every direction. Blood rained from the sky as I covered my face. When it was all said and done, nothing was left of him but a smoldering crater. I told the hunters to turn me in as we made it back to the main trail. They testified about what they knew, and I managed to keep myself from going to jail thanks to them realizing I was the one being held against my will. Blake was once my friend, or so I thought. Now he's gone, and I can't help but to feel his last act was just to cause more trouble.